Hello and welcome back. This is now chapter 9, David Hammons, and the chapter reflects on art and its and the role of identity in art and heritage and how those feed off of one another. So this is David Hammons. About the artist, he was born in Springfield, Illinois in 1943, and this is significant because he would have lived through civil rights movement and he would have been influenced by a lot of the big names from that era. So he went to school, undergrad and grad in Los Angeles, and he moved and lives in Harlem, New York now. He is classically trained in printmaking, and this is the only picture of his prints that I have, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we will actually come back and discuss this photo in just a second. So let's talk first, though, a little bit about his artistic progression and the philosophy behind the art that he makes. So the way I see it, there are kind of three eras or three classifications. We have the academic era, the kind of discovery and redefinition of who he is, and the present era. So let's start at the beginning with his printmaking. So he would use his body instead of the plates, resulting in really ghostly images. And we can see previous. There it is. We can see based off of the images that he already was very different in the way that he would do printmaking. So he would put the sheet of paper down and he would grease up whatever side of his body he wanted to print, like this composition here, and then he would lay down on the paper. And when he got up, obviously the grease or the tar or the lard or whatever he decided to use for a specific piece would remain on the paper. And after he would get up, he would then sprinkle graphite onto the paper or some other sort of powdered medium. And of course, the tar or lard or whatever grease would catch the graphite, and so he'd be left with these images that you see, these really ghostly, as they were described, kind of images. So that is his sort of academic era. And then we have what I call the redefinition of himself. So his work was fundamentally reshaped during this time. So this is talking like 1975-ish to about the 80s. He was still producing work, but he also began being really influenced by African American culture and African American history and how those things have both the relationship, right? So how they've both been affected by and how it's affected the American broad sense culture. Uh, and so he kind of started his view on, let's just focus on these two kind of quotes from the book here. His view shifted from him representing himself in the singular to him being a spokesperson for all African Americans, and eventually this definition even expanded. He eventually came to uh, he came to be a voice for all of the people who are underrepresented and marginalized in the United States. And so one other big change that needs to be noted is that he got away from traditional mediums like painting and printmaking in favor of sculpting because they were less European influence, and the mediums that he used for his sculptures are also less are found objects instead of traditional mediums. So here's a quote I have. The art audience is the worst audience in the world. It's overly educated, it's conservative, it's out to criticize, not understand, and it never has any fun. Why should I spend my time playing to that audience? And so that's from David Hammons, and that reflects his view on. So, like we talked about this relationship that he now sees in America, and concerning his artwork, he never wanted his art to be in museums, and he also, with exception, we'll talk about that, but he never wanted his art to be in museums, and he never wanted, and he doesn't really accept a whole lot of commissions. And he wanted his, more importantly than both of those things, he wanted his art to be viewed by those who had influenced him. So that is, namely, he wanted his pieces to be in Harlem, and he wanted his pieces to be observed by the black community. And so we have three of those works. Going left to right, we have the Untitled (parentheses Night Train), which is circa 1989. And so you'll see a lot of symbolism in these later pieces, and it's just incredible. So he wanted to tackle, he wanted to tackle stereotypes. He wanted to tackle racism, and he also wanted to play into the things that did bring comfort, right? And so with this first piece we have, those are actually liquor bottles or disposable flasks that, have the kind of, I don't know, concave and convex sides so that they can sit nicely on each other to make that perfect sphere. And so he's, all of his work is social commentary essentially, right? And so this one addresses alcoholism and yeah, and many other things, and I leave that to you to unpack further. And the same thing goes with his 1992 piece, where he would use hair that he collected from the local barber shops in Harlem, and also he would use wire and stone, and also pantyhose and leather to kind of hold some of those elements in. And finally, we have the African American flag from 1990, and this is still actually pretty well circulated and mass produced now. It kind of has become, like he talked about, it's kind of become a symbol or symbolic of black culture, and it's got a lot of symbolism in it too. It is constructed primarily of dyed cotton, and yeah, dyed cotton. So we'll leave it at that. So let's move on to kind of his modern works. This is a really beautiful sculpture that he's been commissioned to do by the Whitney Museum in Brooklyn, I think. They'll talk about it in New York. And so the audio might be a little bit weird because it doesn't record audio straight from the computer, so I'm having to loop my microphone up to my headphones. So this will be interesting, but all the same, I hope that you enjoy this video, because I thought it was really enlightening.
One of the things New York City desperately needs are monuments that reflect this city demographically, that reflect this city and its diversity. As I imagine it, it will be this somewhat luminous, invisible, yet very present installation of steel and aluminum that allows us to look through it into the sky, across the river, but to also remember the pier. The piers in Manhattan have a very important role in this city's history.
I think it's a really amazing moment to have a work by David Hammons in the city of New York that does two things. That talks about the kind of landscape of New York and points to it or points through it in such a way in all the many changes that have happened.
It's also referencing a Gordon Matta Clark sculpture or sculptural intervention into that former building.
So it's pointing to this lineage of artistic practice and relationship to New York in a way that is ephemeral and kind of abstract.
Gordon Matta Clark was an artist who lived in New York. He's most famous for making works where he cut into abandoned structures.
He actually comes and lives and works on Gansevoort Street at a time when this was the Wild West side of New York in the early 1970s. This was all meatpacking warehouses. Gordon's greatest works were the buildings that he cut up, like the pier here on Pier 52. He took the pier shed, he broke into it, he chopped it up, he opened it up, he turned it into a cathedral of light and water. When David came here, I pointed out the window and I mentioned to David that was where Gordon Matta Clark had done his pier cut on Pier 52. A matter of days later, he gave us this little drawing without anything on it. At the time, he called it a monument to Gordon Matta Clark.
The basic sketch that David Hammons made of his idea showed lines that represented the barest silhouette of the building, the shed that was there, Pier 52. So part of the decisions that were made along the way was how many of those lines were necessary.
In 1983, he did a piece called Blizzard Bowl Sale where he sold snowballs in front of Cooper Union on the sidewalk in graduated size. And that piece was very much about the ephemeral, about the idea that art cannot be really owned, and that art is something that's in the air, so to speak, or all around us all the time. And I think that that's a real a connection, even with what, in particular, he's doing here with the Days End project.
I think what David often does through his work is unearth narratives that are difficult for we Americans to accept. Those narratives are harsh. They often remind us of where we have failed as a country. And David reminds us of our aspirations, but that we have a long way to go to achieve those aspirations.
It interests me that he took Matta Clark's gesture and even the idea of this pier as a kind of ready-made. It was a found object that no longer exists. It's also about the history of the neighborhood, its maritime past, its commercial past, its indigenous past, and about the unique ecology of the site. The pier is a place that's had many different meanings over time.
The piers have always been the place where people on the margins gather. And as a queer New Yorker, I'm very familiar with the importance of the piers as a place for gathering, as a place for socializing, networking.
It's the idea that this is a restatement of history. It's about gentrification, about what no longer will be there. These pier sheds, which there are hundreds of them, very few of them are left, and someday this might be one of the very few remnants.
You know, AIDS histories are really important in the pier, in the idea of loss, the idea of cultural loss that is embodied in the sites in and around the Whitney and in and around that's the artworks placement.
But David took that idea, in fact, of that erasure and in a way brought it back to life. For me, it's a kind of ghost.
And this monument will be one of the first of this century that actually reflects the views of a living artist and that reflects the built environment here on the west side of Manhattan.
Alrighty, and so that is Days End by David Hammons. And if you are interested in that piece, they are actually because of Rona, they've pushed it back from July until September for the viewing or the kind of inaugural day of when they unveil it. So this has been Chapter 9 on David Hammons. Thanks for listening to all of it, and be sure to stay safe.